Miko, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing good, man. Thank you for another episode of Mindful Techie Tuesday.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for getting us all set up and setting up the studio. And we had an interesting conversation in the green room about sound and lighting. So appreciate all those tips and all that you're doing on the producing side. Um, so are you ready to dive into this week's conversation?
Yeah, let's maybe if you can help us start by sharing a little bit about what we should expect today.
Awesome. So, for folks that have been watching, that have been tuned in not only to this show and to this conversation series, but also to what's been happening in the world, we're dealing with the intersection of really two interesting things right now. So, we're dealing with the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And how that's forced many of us to be working from home, sheltering in place, and homeschooling. And then simultaneously, what we're seeing along with that is in recent weeks, this discussion about racial justice and racial equality. And our guest today, I'm excited, is going to help us to really bridge the two of these topics by talking about what it means to be young, Black, and working from home. And so we're going to be talking about the intersection of all of these things. And I hope it's going to be an exciting conversation. And it'll be fruitful not only just for individuals, but also for organizations that are working at the intersection of these issues and are looking to figure out how do they better support their employees, their colleagues, their friends, their family, and how can we be effective allies at the intersection of these particular topics.
I mean, this topic this week is timely, just given the circumstances. But like all these different crossroads, as you mentioned, is going to give us a great opportunity, kind of like move some of our conversations forward. So let's bring on Ronnell for a quick hello before I jump off. Ronnell, how are you?
Hello, Carlos and Mika. I'm doing well. How are y'all doing?
Doing well. We're happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here as well. Thanks for the invitation.
You're welcome. So for folks that are new to us or just joining us, I want to invite you as we start this conversation about being young, Black, and working from home to like, love, share this video, this feed, comment, and tag someone that you think could benefit from being a part of this conversation. And I also, with that, want to give you a little bit of a formal introduction to Ronnell, who is a friend of many years. I remember when he first moved to the DC area, and we've been connected ever since then. And Ronnell is many things, but just to give you a snapshot, he is a serial entrepreneur, someone who's deeply passionate about Black culture around the world, about travel and how those things intersect. And most recently, he is the founder of a new platform called Young, Black, and Working from Home. And it's a platform that is really designed to elevate this conversation about what it means to be young and Black and work from home in the current environment. So I'm going to pause and let Ronnell say a little bit more about who he is and what he hopes that we discuss today during today's conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you're absolutely right, Miko. A lot of what I do in my life, regardless of where it is or what I'm focusing on, really has a lot to do with centering Blackness and centering Blackness in the global perspective. So representing the different perspectives around the diaspora. I do that through my travel company, Afro Buenaventura, by highlighting the stories and communities of African descent in Latin America. And now I do it through Young, Black, and Work from Home, where I'm really wanting to highlight kind of my lifestyle and the way it's kind of expanded in the new normal of working from home, but also talk about the intersection of race and remote work and creating safe spaces for all employees, specifically Black employees, to show up as their full selves and feel safe, however they are interacting with their colleagues. So that's really what I'm doing, and it's been well received. I really appreciate all the love, and actually, I just booked my first consulting client through that platform. So I'm really excited about the work that I've been doing and really where I'm going to be going over the next few months.
Well, awesome. So first of all, congratulations on that new consulting client. I know that that whatever the work is going to be something that actually drives this conversation forward in a positive way. So before we dive into the nitty gritty, and I want to come back to something that you said in your opening remarks about creating safe spaces. But before we dive into the nitty gritty, let's talk about how are you doing in the current environment. So how is Ronnell doing in the current environment? How are you managing and navigating this?
Yeah, just a couple nights ago, I wrote a blog post about the 12 things that I've learned about myself working from home. And my very first bullet point, number 12, was I am alive and vibrant. Like I feel so alive and connected with who I am as a human being than I've ever felt before. And I really attribute that to not having to wake up at the crack of dawn and do the rigmarole of getting to work and traveling and hustling and bustling and being around a whole bunch of people and all of that energy drain that happens in the process. I really attribute it also to being in the place where I've created a space that really inspires me. In that blog post, one of the bullet points said, I get to every day look at knickknacks that I've collected from around the world in my travels. I get to stare at pictures of people who love me and who I love. So like, there's no other physical space that could be more inspiring right now. And so all of that, I feel like really feeds into me. So despite what's happening in the world with racial injustice and COVID-19, I really feel invigorated. Like my dreams every night are vibrant. I have so many ideas. Every few minutes, I'm taking notes about something else I want to explore and investigate. So I feel really good, but I'm also managing the external issues that are also facing, the entire world. So I'm able to manage it, but I really feel alive and so vibrant.
Well, awesome. So the way you frame that and just the positivity that you're exuding right now reminds me of something that I've written about called PTG, or post-traumatic growth, right? So often we talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome or a stress disorder where we have a negative response to the undue stress and trauma that we're experiencing. But the counterpart to that, or the opposite of that, is PTG, which is where we grow and evolve in a positive way despite whatever the negative situation, or in this case, the trauma that we might have been experiencing. So is that a conscious decision on your part, or you're just privileged to be able to just be in this place that you're coming from?
I think it's a little bit of both, because I was watching one of your previous episodes, and I mean, there's a privilege that I have working as a knowledge worker who doesn't have to invest my physical labor in order to make my money. So that's kind of a level of privilege that allows me to stay at my home, and in a home that I get to dictate the terms of what's happening inside of it. So I recognize that. But also a lot of it is a conscious decision on my own behalf to not click every single thing that I see with a headline that's salacious or representing what's happening in the world, not to re-traumatize myself by engaging with certain media. And I was just reading a blog post about it today. Somebody termed it as a content diet. Like literally, I'm curating the kind of content that I'm consuming every day. And I feel like because I pursue content that is productive for what I want to pursue in my life, and that is constructive in certain ways and doesn't rehash issues that I already am aware of, I feel like that really impacts how I feel as well, because I choose not to engage in the places that I feel like could be taking from me rather than adding to my life.
Well, that's awesome. So that's really beautiful. So I want to come back to this topic about privilege, and for the folks that aren't in the same space, what thoughts or strategies do you have for those folks or organizations that are supporting those folks? But let's dive into this new platform that you've launched, Young Black and Working from Home. Tell us in your own words, what is this platform and how did it get started?
Yeah, it's been such an evolution, and you were a part of the formative conversation as I was trying to figure out like how it would be received. But I represent my Blackness in the professional setting. I feel like Black people have this double consciousness, especially those of us who work in corporate America. We have to, we are Black because we were born Black, but also we have to put ourselves in spaces where we may be the only Black person, or certain topics are taboo. And often those topics are racism and racial discrimination and things that make us feel uncomfortable, because it's places that we have to embody to make our money are not necessarily receptive to our whole identities. So what I'm talking about on Young Black and Work from Home is, how do we start to have those conversations in our workplaces without feeling like they're taboo? How do we encourage our colleagues to educate themselves so that race conversations in the workplaces are no longer politicized and they're no longer off the table? But how do we each contribute our voices to creating a culture in our workplaces where we can talk about these issues, address them, and all feel welcomed? And also, what does that mean in a virtual context, considering that we're no longer in a physical space, but in our virtual spaces and building virtual communities and conversations around that topic. This platform got birthed because I realized on my personal Instagram, I was reflecting a lot of the lifestyle opportunities that I was engaging in, cooking particular kind of cookies that I researched, or starting a balcony garden. And those are kind of lifestyle content pieces that was a little bit different from what I previously posted. And I said, I feel like there are other people that may be feeling this kind of creativity and this freedom as well. And I want to share that with them and give them an opportunity to share how working from home is working for them. But then also it kind of took a little veer to the side when we had a lot of civil unrest due to murder of Black men at the hands of police and vigilante folks. So I was like, I feel like my voice can also not only just talk about my lifestyle and the value that work from home brings, but also I want to talk about what I can do as a young Black professional work from home to lend my voice to bring awareness to the issues, and how can we impact and affect change in corporate America.
Awesome. So you mentioned that this platform is really about engaging folks in this conversation about the intersection of Black identity and how it shows up in the workplace, particularly right now, the virtual workplace, and recognizing that the culture doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It exists in a context, and you just provided a beautiful illustration of that against the backdrop of what's happening now with I would say that the started with the murder of George Floyd, and then that really shone a light on some of the other things that have sort of been swept under the rug, so to speak. Can you speak to what you hope people in practical terms take away from this? So we're starting the conversation, but is there anything in particular that you hope people will actually do in terms of concrete action as a result of these conversations that you're instigating in your platform?
Absolutely. I hope that people feel empowered. I was recently a part of some planning for a June 10th town hall that my day job hosted. And I got to look at the first draft of what this program was about. And it felt really weighty, which it is, but it did not feel like it was positioning folks who attended this program to feel like they were empowered personally to make changes. And that is really what the key is. It's not about, there's these people in the streets protesting. That's them. It's not about there's these families grieving because their fathers, brothers, and nephews are murdered. It's about all of those things, but also about me. What can I do within my sphere of influence, whether it be personal or professional? What can I do? So what I really want people to feel like is that these issues are so real and so important and urgent right now that not only are we going to, or should we consume the content and be aware that they're happening, but we need to lend our voices to the movement in whatever way that we can. And so I recognize for myself, I have a day job where I can't be out there in the streets, late at night and doing certain things, but I can lend my influence inside my organization to look at structural racism, to look at policies that are biased. So that's really what I want folks to do, is take a inventory of where does their power lay, who can they influence to add to this movement, because it's not just about protests and it's not just about responding to murders. It is responding to a history that has built a system that we are all a part of, and we all have the power to dismantle.
I think that's really powerful, and the context that you provided during that last bit is really important, that this isn't just about one incident, that this is about situating this in a larger socio-cultural, political context that it's historical. It didn't just start with this moment. It didn't just start a few weeks ago. So to that point, you talked about creating safe spaces, particularly for Black folks. Can you talk about why Black people in particular, like you've been unapologetically Black about the fact that this is young Black and working from home in the current context. I imagine some people will say, well, we all want to be healthy and well and have a safe space and working from home. It's the same. You might hear from people that say, well, yes, of course, Black lives matter, but what about all lives? So how do you respond to folks that are asking that are maybe sincere, right? And they have a genuine question about why just Black people? Or can you talk to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So one thing that I really recognize here is that when my the content that I was creating for this platform moved from just pictures of my balcony garden and pictures of the Madeline cookies that I make, and when it moved from that to talking about issues of systemic racism in corporate America, I realized I was taking a risk. And so I was sharing with my mom how, I've received a lot of great feedback on my blog, and a lot of that feedback has been channeled through LinkedIn. And, I was telling her, I understand that her generation probably would not think highly of talking about race on a professional platform. That's the risk that I'm taking, because race hasn't been talked about in corporate America. And oftentimes folks that, we know ourselves that are probably the generation before us just had to suck it up because they were working to get a pension. They wanted to just keep their jobs, keep their head down and hustle. But I realized that, young folks right now working from home or wherever they work, we kind of have this daring attitude and this recognizing that we have a lot of power. I feel like a lot of it comes from technology. A lot of it comes from our just creativity and recognizing that we do have voices that can be heard and that can affect change. So the reason why I really want to position it around young Black and work from home is because young folks just have this tenacity and this, I feel like, social environment that is just ripe for us to take advantage of making a move and making our voices heard. But also for Black folks, because if you do contextualize it around history, Black folks have a particular history where we've been forced to acquiesce to white supremacist views on our beauty, on how we show up in the workplace, on how we talk in the workplace, on all of these things that constrict our full self showing up where we spend most of our daily hours. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I really want to talk about Black folks and centered around Blackness. And also I recognize that for so long, folks haven't had a vehicle through which they could express these ideas or commiserate about these ideas. So that is really why I'm positioning around that. And like I said, my entire worldview is focused on highlighting, not necessarily my worldview, but my perspective about my role in the world is highlighting Black stories and figuring out how all of us can work together to highlight those stories and propel change and bring about change. So that's really why I'm positioning it around being young Black and work from home. And I recognize there are a lot of folks from different ethnicities and identities that are working from home. So I definitely would encourage them to participate in the conversation too, and also use their privilege to talk to folks in their organizations, to talk to leaders, to bring about these conversations and to create awareness within their communities as well.
So that's really powerful. So you're inviting folks into this platform regardless of where they fit or how they self-identify, which I think is really powerful. So it's a conversation to elevate the perspective of Black folks that are young Black and working from home. But it's a platform, it sounds like, based on what you just said, that can be there's something there for people to take from that wherever they're coming from. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I had a conversation with my former boss, and she was asking me a lot of questions about the content that I put forward, and I had to kind of explain what I meant, and she just wasn't aware. So I feel like there's an awareness piece, but also there's a lot of content that you don't have to identify as being young Black to get value from. I make smoothies and I showcase smoothies. I make cocktails. I do all kind of stuff that, I feel like can provide value to folks, but it's also representative of the kind of life and the new normal that I am finding personal value from. So I don't feel like you have to, be any particular demographic to find value from what I'm presenting. But I definitely want you to be aware that a lot of the issues that I'm talking about are particular to Black folks.
So let's dive deeper into that last comment. So particular to Black folks. So there was an article that I believe I tagged you on. A group of sisters wrote an article for Harvard Business Review about this particular topic, being Black and working from home in the current environment. And I saw that it was shared across LinkedIn and social media. And one of the comments was from a white gentleman that essentially wrote a comment that said, well, what's the evidence for this? Like, how do we know this is really happening? So how do you respond to that? So what are some things that you have personally experienced that make this platform necessary? And what are you hearing from people that respond to you saying, me too? They're raising their hand as well, saying this happened to me too.
Yes. I'll start it growing up. So I grew up right outside of Chicago, and my dad had us very involved in our church. And I used to have locks when I was younger. And I remember a gentleman in my church told me, you should cut those locks off. You're not going to get very far professionally with those. And if anybody was familiar with locks, you might know about another term of dreadlocks. So there's this pressure for Black folks to acquiesce to white beauty standards, to make ourselves look less intimidating in order to feel a part of corporate American community and to be taken seriously by folks in power who are usually white folks. So I feel like that is really kind of a personal thing that I recognize as being an issue through my life. And just as recently as about 2 months ago, I was racially discriminated against during a video call for work by a colleague. So it's very real. It happens. And I know there are many other people that has happened to as well. But one thing that I recognized in that situation was that there was no solid way to report that this happened, to understand what the policies were around how to navigate this issue, to understand the metrics of are other people in my organization experiencing that. So it's happening. It's just that it's sometimes, so covert, or sometimes people don't feel like they have the power or want to take the risk to report it. So it's real because we experience it every day. And for folks who say that it's not real, it's just because they're not aware. And also, if they were to recognize that racial bias and discrimination happens in workplaces, it would probably challenge a lot about their own status and their own complicity in these issues.
So can you be, I want to challenge you just to be really crystal clear and specific, because I want people to not just know like we're talking in vagaries, but so for our allies who are well-intentioned, can you give us some real examples of things that have actually happened that you're trying to address through this platform?
Absolutely. So I was on a video call and it was about 10 or so people. I got onto the video call, and if you're familiar with certain video call platforms, they'll have a little circle that's an avatar. They call it an avatar, and you can put like a headshot in there. And I had this really stylized headshot that I had taken by a friend of mine in New York last summer. It looked really fancy, right? And so the white lady commented on it. She said, "Oh, Ronnell, you look so nice in your photo. You look like a movie star." No, you look like a rapper. And then she proceeded to beatbox and do hip hop gestures live on the transmit to my entire team. And not only did she do that, and it left me in shock, so I didn't respond, but no other colleague responded. No other white colleague responded. My Black colleague, he texted me, but nobody else said anything else.
So let me pause here. So for folks who don't understand why that's problematic, can you break down why that's problematic?
Absolutely, because that's one stereotype. But I was in this diversity training yesterday, and the trainer played this clip of a white CEO talking about his Black friend. And before he talked about what happened to his Black friend and being racial discriminated, he said, "My Black friend has a degree from here. He runs this. He's a manager from this. He's an entrepreneur from this." So and one thing I don't like about it is when people talk about their Black friend and they give all these accolades and caveats to why racial discrimination shouldn't happen to that person. But the thing about it is, there is no amount of education. There's no amount of net worth. There's no amount of class elite status that I could have that would prevent me from being subject to racial discrimination. There is none. I have multiple degrees. I speak another language. I travel internationally several times a year. I have all these things going on for me, yet and still, I was compared to a hip hop artist. I provide value to my organization all the time, especially in this COVID situation. The things that I build for my organization allows my organization to sell and make money and create revenue in a time where, our entire business base has fallen apart. And still, someone wants to compare me to a hip hop artist. Not only did that offend me, but also it took my breath away. It took my zeal away. I felt like I just lost all agency to even advocate on my own behalf. So if you imagine how somebody in a professional workplace could just be rendered almost powerless, that is really the power of racial discrimination, that it just takes your whole voice away because you feel like I've tried so hard to prove myself in this white corporate American world, yet and still, this is how they view me.
So thank you for sharing that, because I wanted to just make sure folks were really crystal clear about not only what it was, but also I could feel and sense your emotion as you were sharing the story about that. So have there been, as you mentioned, a response to the platform and your sharing of this particular anecdote? Have folks shared other things with you that sort of validate this discussion that we're talking about?
Yes, there's someone who I know who's a professor who, previously would come to work a particular way, real groomed or whatever. But now in a virtual space, she feels a little bit more like, even though she's at home, she still have to show up a particular way, whether it be, hair done a certain way. And so I feel like that is kind of another particular issue that the Black folks face, because, we're very particular about how we show up in public spaces and at work. And we're also subject to more scrutiny based on our physical appearance. So that's something I've heard. And also just the way that we have to almost invite folks into our home. And so, the details of what's behind us and how we're presenting those spaces is a little bit challenging, because it kind of denotes class or, wealth in some instances.
So, okay, so let's talk about that, because again, going back to this HBR article, again, looking at the comments on that, one of the things was this is from a non-Black person, was I think it's great that we get to see where each other lives, and we get to share in that common experience of working from home. Like, what's so bad about forcing people to be on camera and to share their space with their colleagues?
So you want to know what's so bad about it?
Yeah.
So I think that what's so bad about it is because we kind of lose control over our personal space. And for in a historical context, Black folks have always been ridiculed or felt like a pressure to acquiesce to certain corporate standards and beat a certain level of buttoned up. And also during COVID-19, a lot of us have not had the opportunity to go get our haircuts, to go get our hair done. So in order for us to show up at work means that we have to be on camera and show up in a way that we're less confident and feel less ready to be shown in public like that. That is kind of a challenging situation. So if you don't understand the reason why that is such a weighty issue for Black folks, then as a boss or manager, you might just feel like your employee is just being insubordinate. So I feel like that awareness and that level of context around the implications that race has on people wanting to not show themselves on camera, I feel like that's where the relevance comes in.
So let's turn the conversation to more practical. Like, what can we do? So now that we've talked a lot about raising awareness, providing context, getting really concrete and getting really specific, so folks by this point should really know exactly what we're talking about. So let's start with Black folks. What are the things that Black folks can do concretely to address these kinds of issues? And I want to speak specifically from the perspective of perhaps someone who is they know their lived experience, but maybe they don't have the language. They're not an academic. So what are the concrete things they can do? How should they be having these conversations with their colleagues?
Yeah, I definitely believe that, one, getting over the kind of hesitation to talk about these things in the professional workplace is one other thing. I mean, that's a risk you need to take. And so one of the strategies that I presented in a recent post was, let your colleagues know how you're feeling. Like, be really honest about the weight of the social issues that are forcing you to spend energy thinking about your own mortality or the risk that you take every time that you walk out of the door. Like, I feel like a lot of people just might not be aware of that. So take that risk and tell your colleagues and your team or whoever it is you feel like can respond in a way that is helpful to you. Let them know really what you're facing. And I feel like that can just be the backdrop. On a personal level, I would say then ask or tell folks, I don't feel comfortable showing up on camera today. I would prefer this to be voice only, or this is how I want to show up in the meeting. You kind of have to advocate on your own behalf. And also, maybe you just want to, if you're uncomfortable with people sitting inside your home, go to a place that is a little bit less, decorated or bare, where you really feel like is a comfortable space that's not personalized, that you don't feel like people are going to judge. So I feel like just taking those kind of personal steps might be able to help you advocate for yourself in a concrete way, and also put boundaries up for yourself. But then I feel like a next step is write bullet points down about how your organization can help you feel safer in a virtual workplace, and go to the right person to make those issues happen, whether that be your direct supervisor and using them kind of as the vehicle, or if you feel comfortable going to your HR director or CEO, whoever you have a relationship with, and say, hey, this is the way I'm thinking about these issues. How do you feel we could create policies or procedures to address these issues, to make sure that everybody feels comfortable when they show up and work in a virtual workplace? Because it's one thing to do these personal workarounds, but the system is really what needs to change. And the way that we change the system is through policy and procedures and really concrete rules about how we're managing and how we're making sure that our workplaces are safe for everybody, and safe for Black people specifically in this time.
So that's really powerful, and I think I want to work backwards. So I think you said something that's really powerful about actually writing down what you're experiencing, at least from the perspective of trying to help your colleagues to help you. And so I want to actually back up a little bit, and I want to circle back to these 3 steps. So these 3 steps presume that you have a consciousness of how you're feeling, right? So sometimes we're operating in the world and we're reacting a certain way, and we're not aware necessarily that it's a result of, for example, watching nonstop footage of, what's happening with George Floyd, or I'm not sure if I think I shared the Dave Chappelle, video with you. I'm not sure if you had the opportunity to watch that, but maybe you're saying things like that are really heavy and that are really weighty, right? So can you talk from your personal perspective, how have you cultivated this awareness to know that this is how you're feeling, in order to even get to the place where you can then communicate to your colleagues to say what you need?
That's I'm not sure I really understand exactly where you want me to go, but I'm going to say this. There are rituals that I do every single day to create space for me that separate me from my work and separate me from what's going on in the world. Every single morning I get up. I'm not going to tell you what time it is, because I don't want, my supervisor to get on me about it. But I get up and I make water with lime juice in it. So I have my alkaline water, and I will go out on my balcony and water my plants, and I might do some stretches. So I just create spaces and rituals that allow me to detach from everything else that doesn't have to do with my own personal well-being. So I feel like that gives me the level of clarity to really understand what is my body and my spirit telling me. I'll share something with you. A few weeks ago, I literally woke up out of my bed screaming. I just popped up screaming. And that was very puzzling to me, because I don't consume a lot of the content that a lot of folks are consuming that is really traumatic. So I really wasn't sure where it was coming from. But I realized that I still have this awareness of being Black in America. And I still have this awareness of vulnerability in public and in professional spaces. So I feel like my body and my spirit was just telling me this is still affecting you. So I really realized that I need to continue to create spaces for myself. And so I was watching a lot of YouTube videos. That's a way that I kind of create a safe space for me. But I've also recently gotten some books. And so I've dedicated some time every night to reading books. So on specifically anti-racism strategies and restorative justice, so that I can continue to create my awareness about these strategies and how to work through these systems, and create awareness about, context of what's happening in a historical sense. So I would just really encourage folks to stop engaging. I feel like we have this feeling that we always have to be aware of what's happening in the world. And a lot of times it's positioned or posited as news. Everything that's happening right now is not news, because one is Black folks living in the world. We understand what's happening. Everything is not news. Everything does not require you to respond to it or like it or to play it back. Like, you really have to find space for yourself to decompress and engage in living your life outside of work and outside of the world that's happening around us.
So that was really powerful. And the reason I asked you that question, because this is a conversation series about the intersection of mindfulness, work life, and tech life balance. And so what you just talked about is, in some ways, is a mindfulness based or awareness, a self awareness practices that you're engaging in that are doing a few things. It sounds like, number one, you talk about actually just making space to unplug from the work and from the other things that could be contributing to how you're actually feeling, right? The anxiety that you're feeling around being Black in this current environment. And then the second is taking care of yourself, right? Figuring out what's working for you in terms of it, just taking care of and nourishing yourself. And so if I'm regurgitating back the advice you're giving, I'm thinking that's top of the list, right? Creating space for yourself is top of the list. And then communicating to your colleagues how you're feeling and how you're processing. And I would actually start for folks that perhaps maybe you're struggling with the language, maybe you feel insecure about that, is to maybe write it down, to journal about it, to process it first in words. And then once you have something that you feel is coherent enough, then you can have that conversation with your colleagues. And maybe that needs to be in writing too. So for some people, maybe they process better in writing. So maybe they write an email or a letter or whatever that might be to the appropriate person. And then one of the other things you mentioned was actually, once you've communicated how you're feeling and you've asserting your boundaries in terms of how you show up in a virtual meeting, for example, then the next step is, what are the practical policies an organization can actually make, right? And this is where it goes from not just this is how I'm feeling, but here's what you can do to help me, to help us. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely, yes. The thread goes all the way through each one of those steps. And I feel like, you talked about something where, if someone might not have the language. I was talking about myself being on a content diet, and a part of that content diet is reading these books. But there are bloggers out there. There are folks on LinkedIn. I've seen the kind of this research. I was talking about, Black folks haven't felt comfortable talking about race in professional settings. But right now, if you looked on LinkedIn, they're talking about race. Even, the companies and the white folks who 2 weeks ago were talking about it, even though they're not talking about it anymore, the door has been opened for Black professionals to really talk about what we're feeling and really what we want to ask of the organizations that we belong to. So I feel like if you don't have the language, read some of those posts, look at content creators and look at the vocabulary that they're using and the terms and the way that they're describing their experiences. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of those experiences will resonate with you. And then you can kind of internalize that language and how to express it to your colleagues and other folks within your organization as well.
And you've done this. So a lot of the blog posts you've written, I would say all of the blog posts you've written so far for the platform are exactly that. I feel like someone could literally take and say, like, look, Ronnell wrote this blog post about 7 things that you should be including in your statement about
Absolutely.
race and whatever. Like you can literally like press forward on that. And those are your words, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you started off with cite Ronnell, but you know what? That's exactly it. I want to provide value to folks so they can say, okay, what am I asking of my organization? Oh, Young Black and Work from Home says these are some things, these are some ideas. And I'm sure that you can take those ideas and add on to it. And the thing about it is, I've been talking to folks in my organization. And the thing about it is, you don't need an HR person or a director over this to say, this is what the organization needs to do. The organization should be literally crowdsourcing those ideas. And you're a part of that crowd, so you can seed that, those requests and those policy changes into your organization. And definitely you can use my site as a resource if you need to put vocabulary and language around it. And also there's just some really concrete ideas that I feel like if they're coming from you as a Black person in a sincere way, who is really committed to the organization, if they don't listen to you, then they're missing the whole message. But I'm pretty sure that they'll listen to you if you're an employee who's really thinking about the whole well-being of the organization.
Yes. And I think we're making some assumptions here. So one is, for the purpose of this conversation, I'm assuming that we have well-intentioned allies that perhaps are just lacking in understanding in certain areas. And so I think that's the place that we're coming from. If you're not in one of those places, I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I think this is one of those things where you think about, okay, well, is this the right place for me? And what is my exit strategy? How do I get to a safer place? But that's a separate conversation. But do you want to speak on that briefly?
Yes. So I've been in my organization for 6 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go. I've seen a lot of the senior level folks come and go. So I feel like I have kind of this energy and this sense of belonging enough to be able to talk about these things. But I recognize some people can't. So I would, say start in whatever way feels comfortable with you. Maybe that just means starting in your home and talking about what this means for you and why it's important. And then starting with your colleagues and talking about why this is important. And maybe y'all can form a group that, kind of delivers a group message. And maybe that will take some of the burden off of you, and maybe kind of the risk kind of will be spread out. But I feel like, right now we cannot afford to be silent, because the consequence of being silent is literally death. And I feel like that's kind of in a societal sense, but in a corporate America sense, the consequence of being silent is continued racial inequity in terms of promotions, in terms of power, in terms of compensation. So when I think about that, it becomes real. When it becomes a matter of me getting paid less than somebody else who might have my same credentials and same experience because I'm Black, and them not even being aware that this is what's happening, it becomes very personal. So when I think about it in those terms, I'm willing to risk using my voice to agitate some folks and get on folks' nerves if that means that they're going to implement some policies that could positively impact people like me, people who look like me, and everybody else within the organization.
Yes. So to that point, for folks that are maybe struggling with how to have this conversation, obviously it sounds like they can bring you in, hire you, consult with you to help their team, their organization have this conversation. So that brings me to the next part of the conversation. Let's talk about what organizations and allies can do. So we talk about what Black folks can do, but what can organizations and allies do? What are the top 2 or 3 things people should be thinking about?
Yeah, in terms of allies, I would definitely say, I kind of think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, right after George Floyd's death, as kind of a reckoning where folks are like, oh, this is real. And I don't even know why this is any different from previous issues, but for some reason, it just came to this head that had never been experienced before. So people have a reckoning. And I feel like allies, what you can do right now is hold the space for your colleagues to talk about whatever's happening for them and how it's making them feel.
So let's pause there. Yeah. So, yes. So what does it mean to hold the space? I don't think people understand that. That's one of those terms that are thrown out there. What do you mean hold the space?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a buzzword. One is depoliticizing the expression of what happens to an individual when they are discriminated against because of their race, and how these issues of racial injustice are affecting them. Holding space means suspending your judgment, just giving them the opportunity to say, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is why it's important to me. And this is what I want you to hear from me. And it's not that you are listening because you feel like you want to absolve yourself, or that you want these Black people to put their trauma on display, but you're listening so that you can become aware, and so that you can also take the next step of moving into action for yourself. So this is not, go ahead. So this is not just a Black folks need to be actionable right now. This is, I'm an ally. I am hearing, I'm recognizing, I'm accepting. Now, what can I do with my privilege to move the needle here?
Yes, what you just described reminds me of like one of the tenets of essentially basic communication practice, which is to seek first to understand, right? And so you're not judging what's coming up. You're not trying to massage your ego. You're not necessarily trying to look for areas of agreement. You're simply looking to understand what the other person is telling you, what that person is sharing with you, and understanding from their perspective, even if you disagree. Just simply being able to listen and to your point, quote unquote, hold the space. So what's the next thing people can do once they've held the space?
Yeah. Then I would love for these folks to be collaborators in this movement, because like we said, it's a historical issue. It's not just let's defund the police, but it's how has racism and systemic racism affected our entire community, our entire world, our entire society? How has that fed into corporate America? So what can I do as a white person or as a non-Black person to bring these issues to a head. So like we were talking about just a few minutes ago, maybe there's somebody who has been affected by racial injustice in the workplace or in corporate America who doesn't feel like they have the power or the agency to be able to speak up. But they do have a white colleague who might be a little bit higher up, who might be a little bit more senior, who could bring these issues to the fore that these other people can't. So I feel like really recognizing that you have white privilege, just owning that and saying, you know, rather than being well-intentioned, I'm going to be well-actioned. I'm going to be well-informed, and I'm going to move like that.
Yes, I love that. So moving from intention to action. So intention is important because you have to know where you're aiming or what direction you're going in, but you also have to move your feet in that direction. So I like that well action. So I wanted to dive deeper into something you said about people utilizing their privilege. So allies utilizing their privilege, and even I guess Black folks that are at certain levels, right, to utilize their privilege as well. If I'm processing what you're saying, it sounds like there may be like different categories of ways people can use their privilege, right? So there's like I'm gonna write a check, I'm gonna put out a statement, like that's one level of action, right? But then I'm assuming that there are other ways in terms of policy. Can you maybe speak to like the range of ways people can use their privilege?
Absolutely. I feel like, you know, you've talked about some of them. You know, one is funding the movement work, right? And putting your money where your mouth is, or supporting Black businesses. But I feel like that is very finite. I feel like other ways that you can use your privilege is, do you hold a position of power where you can be an advocate for these issues and people are going to listen to you because you hold that power, because you are a part of a particular network or particular demographic of people where, you know, you have a privilege? So that's one. And then also, where do you need to be quiet in order to elevate other people's voices? So where can you say, let's not go with that big company that does diversity work. Let's go with this small operation run by somebody who I know who is Black and who speaks from these perspectives, so that they can, you know, elevate their voice, bring a real world perspective to this conversation, and also just bring other vendors and other players to the field that, you know, traditionally might have just relied on the network of the people who are in power. So I feel like, you know, bringing and uplifting Black voices, bringing them into the work at your organization and paying them to do it, not only just listening, holding space for Black folks to tell you about what's happening to them, but also, you know, and I call that as, you know, hearing Black trauma, but also let's bring them really into the conversation and pay them to do the work. You know, that's, I feel like that's taking it to the next level. And also, where do you need to cede your power to somebody else? So Ohanian, who was the director or the founder of Reddit, he literally gave his board seat up and put as a condition of him giving up his board seat, there needs to be a Black person in my space. So as an ally, as a well-informed, well-intentioned, and now actionable ally, where do you need to move over to give space to somebody else? You know, oftentimes that doesn't just mean making space or, you know, adding people to the table, bringing chairs to the table. Sometimes that means relinquishing your chair and putting somebody else in power, because literally all of this is about power. And I feel like that is also a reason why so many people and so many white people in power have not wanted to talk about it or face this head on, because what it's really going to mean is that a lot of people in power have to give that power up.
So you talk about relinquishing power. So that's really important. You talk about some concrete ways. You gave some examples of ways that people can do that. And then you talked about people actually involving Black folks in the conversation, right?
And in the work.
And in the work. And paying them. So this is something that I think is critically important. You know, for my work, you know, working in public health and in university level research, oftentimes there are projects that center communities of color that are led by white PIs, right, principal investigators, and little, if anything, is given to the inclusion of people of color in actually the development of whatever the intervention is, and the leveraging of the resources, oftentimes which don't belong to the university or to the PI, they belong to some foundation or government, right? So that's an opportunity for you to actually pay people for the expertise, to pay people for their time. So to that point, I want to dive deeper into something and deconstruct, I think, a myth that may be out there. So you used the example of the Reddit CEO who stepped down, and then I believe it's the guy from Y Combinator, I believe it was, that stepped up, Black guy. I think sometimes the way I hear the language, maybe the way I'm processing it, sometimes from our allies, I feel like people think when we talk about including people, Black people, and giving them a seat at the table, they think it's a giveaway, right? They think that, well, you know, we want to have a qualified person, we want to have an experienced person in this seat, and somehow there's this thought that somehow Black people are inherently not qualified and not ready, willing, able to serve. Can you speak to that when we talk about making space for Black people at the table?
Absolutely. There are. I just heard that this morning on a work call where, there's an organization that wants to ask other organizations to open up board seats for Black folks, and we are going to provide this education for them. But the thing about it is, I don't know why there's this notion that there are unqualified Black folks who are trying to be in positions where they would not be qualified to serve. And the thing about it is, just like I was saying, I was on the work call, and despite all my qualifications, all the value that I bring to my organization, somebody still saw me as a hip hop artist when we're talking about virtual learning platforms. I don't know. So there's still this idea that white folks need to get over about Black folks just wanting to come to the table with no value, or come to the table with no education, come to the table just be included for the sake of being included. That's not what we're asking. We're saying we are qualified. We are educated. We are on the same level as you, but because you rely only on your white networks, or because you have this bias that you're not aware of, you are only bringing other white people to the table. So we're just saying, give us a equal footing and an equal opportunity to play in the same sandbox that you play in. And also, not only that, but we're going to be able to bring a perspective that is going to be a lot more valuable than hearing your own perspectives regurgitated to you. So that's what we're saying. We're saying we are everything that you need plus more, because of the historical context of our lives, because of the issues that we face, because of the unique experiences that we have gone through. We can provide all of that value for you. We just need a fair chance to be able to serve and show you that we can deliver for you. That's pretty much what it is.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like when we're having this discussion, we should be the same way that when we talk about other groups, that there's an assumption that when we're having a discussion about hiring, that we're going to hire somebody who's qualified, right? We're going to hire somebody who's experienced. So we're not talking about hiring someone who's not qualified or experienced. We're talking about widening the range of folks who have access to be able to actually apply.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. To be supported in the position.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, I really want to talk about, applying, because, a lot of board seats, a lot of high paying executive roles, they're not open to the public because folks fill them with their friends, or somebody they owe a favor, or somebody they went to college with, somebody that's for their fraternity. And what you realize is that if they're hiring all these people from their sphere and their community, all those people are probably going to look just like them. So that's one thing we need to do is, be really intentional about how we're presenting these opportunities and making sure that, people have access to those opportunities. And also, it's not always about getting somebody that, hiring a Black person that is 100% of what you need, because I guarantee you that a lot of people in power, whoever hired them took a bet on them. Whoever hired them realized that I can grow this person. That is the thing. Everybody's not going to come to you fully baked and fully experienced in all of these technical issues. But the thing about it is, you can give them a chance, and I guarantee they will deliver for you.
Yeah, excellent. So that's wonderful. And I think that's a wonderful way to help us to really bring this conversation to a close. And so with that being said, I want to ask you, so what's next for the platform, and how can people engage with you? You mentioned that you're doing consulting. So if someone hires you, a company hires you, a team hires you, or even an individual maybe who's struggling with how to bring this conversation up with their company, what can they expect?
Yep. So right now I'm working on with a client who wants me to weigh in on racial discrimination in a recruitment process. So I'm definitely open to consulting with clients who want to understand how their organization can create really anti-racist cultures. And the thing about it is, folks who want to employ me, they cannot be afraid to name these issues. And that's the thing. I'm really, like I said, taking a risk of naming these issues, but anybody who wants to work with me is really ready to be actionable and be really intentional about how they're applying their resources to make sure that their workplaces are safe spaces. So I'm definitely open to consulting with folks on how to strategize and round up your internal resources to be able to create equitable institutions and organizations. And so folks can continue to engage with me through the value that I'm presenting through my blogs, where I'm really talking about, my experiences from a personal perspective, but also giving you all strategies and ideas that you all can implement in your own lives and in your own spheres of influence. But also the other side of my content is I want to show you really what the value of working from home can mean for myself, what it can mean for your employees, and really that working from home should be considered a quality of life issue rather than just a benefit. And I really want organizations to see it as a way that they can have their employees feel like they can show up in ways that really allow them to bring their whole selves to work. But not only that, they can provide value that is reflective of themselves being comfortable in the places that they live and being in spaces that inspire them. So I really just want to engage with folks to be able to help them work within their organizations to create change. I want to highlight the value that working from home can provide to employees and to workforces, and really just make sure that the message out there that Black folks are facing a particular set of issues in these times, but it doesn't stop there. The next step is really creating action in our workplaces.
Well, awesome. So thank you for that. And I want to give you an opportunity to give us a closing thought. But before we do that, I want to bring Carlos back. And Carlos, I wanted to see if you wanted to add anything to this conversation. And if you want to speak to your own experience, in this space. So I'm not sure how you identify with this particular issue, but if you want to just share your thoughts on what you received.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know that there's much more that I can add to such great points that Ronnell made today. If anything, I want to thank you, Ronnell, for sharing your thoughts, your experience here today. I want to wish you the best of luck with this new platform. I think it's very relevant given all the circumstances that we described today. We know that there's a lot of professional businesses out there that are thinking post-COVID, and as the stages get rolled out on a state-by-state level of inviting people back to the workforce. A conversation, a very important conversation that should be had in those workplaces is, what does working from home now mean for us, right? Or what does working remotely mean for us? Because we just did it for the past 3 or so months. It isn't as easy as just going back to work as normal. And so, again, I think this platform that you're presenting and moving forward will help dive into changing policies for companies and changing the way employees and employers approach work. So again, thank you for this work that you're doing.
All right, awesome. So thank you for that, Carlos, and for making talk about creating space. So thank you for creating this beautiful studio and setting us up and making sure things are going so smoothly. So Ronnell, as we close out, are there any parting words you want to leave with the audience?
Absolutely. I just want to reiterate the point that we're all a part of this world together. We all have the power to amplify Black voices, to recognize the issues, but it doesn't stop there. The next thing that we really need to do is act. And when it comes to discrimination, issues of discrimination and bias in our organizations, it's not enough just to recognize the issue and put a statement out. Our moral imperative is to actually act to create more equitable spaces. It starts with conversations, but really it ends with making sure that we are enacting policies and procedures and putting into place systems that actively dismantle anti-Black racism in all facets of our society. And one of those places is corporate America.
Well, awesome. So thank you so much for this conversation, Ronnell. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. We definitely, I think, have to have you back to talk about as things evolve for the platform, as you have an opportunity to engage with more clients, definitely diving deeper into your experience with that. So I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and thank you for sticking with us. Again, I'm going to invite you to love, like, share, comment, let us know your thoughts, and to tag somebody who you think could benefit from being a part of this conversation about young Black and working from home. There are things specifically for Black folks that are in this environment, but there are also lots of nuggets that are universal, lots of things for allies that want to be supportive in making things better in this environment. So we want to thank you for being a part of this conversation, and we will see you next week for Mindful Techie Tuesday. Take care.